morning. It's wonderful to be here to share God's word once again. And you know that this year I have been going through the book of Acts, so it comes as a bit of a shock to you that we're in Exodus. So I'm doing the book of Acts 1 month at a time. So this is an extra time in March that I'm here. So I thought I'd go to the Old Testament, just as interesting as the New. And today I'm going to talk about one very familiar figure to you who know the story of Exodus. And he is the Prince of Egypt, enjoys the splendor, the riches of the greatest nation on earth at his time. And he wore extravagant clothes and opulent jewelry. He had hundreds of servants and enjoyed nightly entertainment, received elite education, and was groomed by the greatest ancient culture. Best of the best of the best. He had it all. He was also the greatest political leader of his time. He was the leader of over 1 million people. He was the commander-in-chief of a vast army. He stood toe-to-toe against Pharaoh, the greatest world leader, and he won. He was also the greatest religious leader of Israel. He was the founder of the Old Testament faith community. He was the only leader to have been able to see God and live. He was the deliverer of the 2 stone tablets containing the 10 words commonly known as the 10 Commandments. He was the editor of most of the revered law code of all time. And he was the author of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament in your Bible. Not only that, not finished with the resume. He was the greatest miracle worker known to ancient Mesopotamia. He inflicted the Egyptians with the 10 plagues. He called out to the winds and the clouds. He commanded the frogs, gnats, flies, locusts. He struck down the firstborn of Egypt, livestock and human. He split the waters of the Red Sea and rained down manna from the sky. He made the water come out of the rocks. He erected pillars of cloud by day and fire by night. Yes, this is Moses, the greatest and most revered of all Old Testament figures. But wait, before he was that guy, you just read his resume, huh? Before he was that guy, what was he? We want to understand a little bit of his upbringing, his passage in life. How did he get to where he got to? Well, first of all, actually, before he was all that, he was first a young man with an identity crisis. We can go back a little bit to the beginning of Exodus. You don't have to read. I have some illustrations to show you, and I'll tell you. Remember how Moses came to being, right? At that time, the Hebrews were living in Egypt, and the Pharaoh, Egyptians, make them into slaves. But they have too many of them. They keep giving birth. So the Pharaoh says, no, we want to kill off all of the male babies so they couldn't have so many descendants after that. And because of that, after Moses was born, after a few months, his mom will have to place him in the basket in the River Nile so that he can be killed. It didn't allow me to have animation, so you couldn't see the first one. There was the River Nile, nice Lego set. And then the Lego set goes to the second part. But you know that what happened was he was not killed because by happenstance, he was met by Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter was taking a bath in the Nile and saw this basket go by. Oh no, look, it's a poor baby. And as we all know, we all have mercy on babies, and the Pharaoh's daughter had mercy on Moses. Therefore, he was not killed, but he was picked up. And the Pharaoh's daughter treated Moses as her son. Right? And Moses grew up. Of course, he was a person of 2 different cultures. Right? When he was growing up, Pharaoh's daughter had hired Moses' birth mom to help out for the first few years until Moses is weaned of the milk, and then he had grown up in the palace as Pharaoh's daughter's son. Okay, so what we're seeing is Moses is a man of both worlds. He was Hebrew, but he's also Egyptian. Okay. What we would call, in our context, EBH, Egyptian-born Hebrew. You might be familiar with these acronyms, okay? He was the son of a Hebrew son, but he was the adopted child of the princess of Egypt. And then as he grew up, I'm sure there's a little bit of tension within him and trying to understand who he really was. Who was he? Oh, he was a son of Pharaoh's daughter. Of course, he is a prince, wasn't he? And he had learned all of the education of Egyptian prince is supposed to learn, not only all the books that ancient Egypt might offer, but I'm sure they taught him all the self-defense, martial arts things, which later was helpful when you want to kill someone or not, right? So you learn all these things. And he can call the princess mom. However, as he was walking through the palace or courts or whatever the Egyptians had, he probably couldn't help but see people look at him differently than other princesses, right? Because even though the fact that he might talk like an Egyptian and he might walk like an Egyptian or dance like an Egyptian, clearly people can see he was not an Egyptian, right? He was but the son of a Hebrew slave, but he's adopted. But you know how these things go. As we are talking about succession to the Pharaoh's throne, I don't think Moses was in the cards, right? And people are not going to treat him like a real prince this way because he was not. At the same time, oh, did I show you the other one? When he grew up, he goes back to his own people, right? His birth people was the Hebrews, and he went back there and tried to help them out because they were all slaves and they were being mistreated by the Egyptians. So one time, as the story goes, when he saw one of the Egyptians who was beating up on one of his Hebrew brothers, and then Moses goes and checks out whether there's anybody around. No, nobody's witnessing his crime. There's no CCTV. And so he exercised what he learned in the palace and beat up this Egyptian and killed him. Actually, the Bible didn't say how he did. I'm sure he just did it with his bare hands. He was that good in terms of his kung fu. And so he thought, here I am. If I'm rejected by the Egyptians, that is okay. I'm a Hebrew. I can do something for my own people, right? And I'm full of passion and ability. I'm going to help my people and freedom. However, very quickly, this dream also kind of, poof, is gone. Why? Because the next day, when he went out and saw two Hebrew brothers fighting each other, he's trying to say, hey, no, why are you fighting each other? We should be fighting the common enemy, etc., etc. But his Hebrew brothers were saying to him, oh, he didn't have that. Oh, yeah, here's it. They're like, why do you care? Who made you our leader? Who made you our leader? Why wasn't he his leader? Well, think about it this way. His Hebrew brothers might look at him and say, well, we worked hard as laborers. We got beaten up, we sweated, and we were doing all the work, and we felt hunger. We oftentimes cannot eat what we want to eat because there isn't enough for a slave. But you lived in palace, right? Look at your hands. Not an honest day's work, huh? Nothing, right? You dress in nice robes and everything, and you don't know what we're going through, and now you're going to tell us what to do? Seriously, bro. No. Go home. And not only that, but of course, they exposed the fact that everybody else knew he killed the Egyptian. Okay, now not only that, but he's now on the most wanted list of all of Egypt. Ergo, he has to leave. And that was the first 40 years of Moses' life. Right? In the first 40 years, he tried to figure out who he was. But he's caught between two different cultures. And he finds that he was neither. Right. Now, a little bit, I don't know if we have similar kind of experiences because, most of us here in Canada, Canada is a multicultural, multi-ethnic place, right? Whether you were born here or you were immigrated here, we're always caught between different identities. Right? For me, growing up, I was thinking, am I Chinese? Am I Canadian? At different points, I figure I was one or the other. Right? And when I first came to Canada, I was 13, and we would go to a Chinese church much like this, but not exactly. And the problem was, my English is bad, so I started in the Chinese service, sitting with parents. But it was not really great because, they were talking to adults, and here I was 13. I was not really understanding what's going on. And so I give a try on the English service side and go to the English fellowship. But it was pretty hard too, because first of all, my English wasn't that great at that time, right? So didn't get a lot of things that's going on. Secondly, I'm a little bit of an outsider. Everybody else grew up in the church. No, they were coming to church when they were in their mother's womb. So they were saying hi to each other across wombs. And then they grew up, and they knew everything, and I knew nothing, right? And not only there was a language barrier, but there's a subculture there within that church. Now I'm going in there, and one day we were in a retreat, and everybody's crying. Like, why is everybody crying? They said, oh, so-and-so's dog died, and everybody knew that dog. Everybody's mourning for that dog. I've never seen that dog in my life, right? So I feel like, should I be crying or shouldn't I be crying? I'm not fitting in here. It's kind of hard to fit in. Okay? And then later on, my English got better. I spent more time with these brothers and sisters, and feel like I'm home. And I feel at home in Canada. And then in my high school years, grade 11 and grade 12, our high school, we started a Christian club. And then it's just with our high school Christian friends, right? I was part of that group, and we were together. And I was only one or two kind of Asian faces in that crowd, because at that time it was mostly Caucasian. And we fitted together. We were running the weekly Bible study together. We visited each other's churches. And downtime we were all together. And we were together from grade 11 to grade 12, and even first year university, we still stuck together, a bunch of friends. But at some point, I find out that, now I think I'm Canadian, but actually I'm not really Canadian. Right? Because my friends sometimes would tell me, haven't you visited a Chinese church? I said, well, I left that. This is the church that I go to with my friends. I'm in a group with you guys. I'm not in the Chinese church. Why should I have to go back to a Chinese church? And sometimes they will say, well, why don't you introduce me to a really good Chinese food restaurant in town? And I figure, why am I always the person who's introducing people to Chinese food? Like nobody else knows Chinese food? As you're listening to this, you might be laughing too. At that time, I was not so self-aware until one day I look in the mirror and figure out that, well, yeah, that's why people ask you, because you're Chinese. Undeniably, that's my heritage. That's the way I was born. This is how I look like. As much as I think I'm Canadian, I'm a little different from other Canadian. True? Of course, in a multicultural place, that's what we are all different. Right? But for me at that time growing up, it was a little bit, I can feel Moses in that, well, am I belonging to this group? Am I belonging to that group? I don't necessarily fit here, and I don't necessarily fit there. That's very hard for someone who's young and growing up, because you want to have an identity and you want to have a sense of belonging. Now, let's go to the second part of Moses' life and see what happened to him afterwards. Well, you kind of might know the story, right? After he left Egypt, he was the most wanted, so he didn't want to be in Egypt. He's going into the wilderness, and he's just going wherever, it is, and I'm not sure how he knows where he is, because he doesn't have a GPS at those times, but he just keep going farther away from Egypt. And then the story goes, and then he came to this well, and he saw there's a Midian priest named Jethro. He has 7 daughters. And the daughters came to the well to try to water the flock, likely sheep. But some of the shepherds came along and they drove them away. These are bad guys, right? Because, again, I don't know. Yes, that's better. Some of the shepherds come and say, oh, go away, we get first dibs. You're women, go. Well, that's terrible, right? That's where our hero comes in. And, Moses comes in and say, wait a minute, that's terrible. Shouldn't we allow the women to have first dibs? What are you guys doing? And of course, the shepherds are like, who are you and why do you care? And, there are many of us and there's one of you. What do you want? But they didn't know how Moses was brought up, right? We already talked about Moses. He was trained in the palace as the prince of Egypt. And they had to be well trained in martial arts. One of the main reasons is there's a lot of assassins trying to kill everybody. Okay, no matter whether you are in line or not, pharaohs and their sons and successors are all facing with possibility assassination. They're all very good at self-defense. Ergo, it helps Moses to be able to not only defend himself, but to be able to shoo away these shepherds and be able to allow these women to have water. Wow, it was great. After this, Jethro's 7 daughters go home and tell Dad, and Dad's like, why are you home so early? Usually it takes longer. And they say, yes, because there's Prince Charming here who helped us, right? And he stood up for us. He's wonderful. What a chivalrous guy. And Dad's like, oh, why do you get them to come home and have dinner together and enjoy? And so Moses found his second home. He found a home with his family. Not exactly sure where Medium is or, on a map or whatever, and it doesn't really matter. He was there and he found a home and he started to have a family and he has a professional job, all because he has his father-in-law, because his father-in-law married one of the daughters, Zipporah, to him and allowed him to be the shepherd for his flock. Ergo, the next 40 years of Moses' life, we'll call it's a time of contentment, right? You now settle down. You are able now to do what you want. You can start a family, you can have a job and have a career. That's wonderful, isn't it? From where he has an identity crisis and not accepted by anyone, now he's being accepted by a foreign family, but a family which is willing to accept him, and he started to have his own family, and he has his own job. Wow, isn't that great? A lot of times in our lives, we might move into that stage as well. Right? So a lot of you are graduating, starting to have a job. You might think about how do I move up in my career? And if you have to work for 40 years in your life, what are you gonna do with that? Okay, so there's a lot of competition, but you're upgrading yourself, and then you're on your way to getting married and having kids, and then you have to think about buying a house, where do we live, and all these things. That is a major part of our lives, right? And so we all go through that. And I was, after I graduated from university, I started applying myself into work. And I used to work in the finance sector, in the mutual funds industry. So I started to work, and you always figure out how you can make self-advancements, and I told you, right? I was very good at that. In about 8 years, I advanced myself 6 times, jumped to different companies, and just promote yourself and give yourself a raise kind of thing. So it was pretty good. I got married. We bought a house. We're all just happy. And a lot of people go through this second phase in life, which is contented stability. And Moses also. He had his second of his third 40 years in life. Then he comes to the last part of his life, which is a call to life, I call it. That's the passages that you just read, right? We've gone a long way to come to chapter 3. And chapter 3, verse 1 to 10, it tells us that as Moses was tending the flock one time, and as he was walking around underneath this mountain Horeb, he saw this strange view. There is a burning bush that the bush, despite the fact that it's burning, it never burns up. It just keeps burning. And Moses, like most people, feel, hey, this is very strange. Let's check it out. He went over there and he checked it out, and he found that Not only the burning bush was just a ruse to attract him so he can go there. Because once he got there, there's this voice is talking to him, right? The voice would say, Moses, Moses. I don't know, do you think God sound like that? Some movies does that. And Moses is like, here I am. And then Moses is like, God's like, don't come any closer. Take off your sandals. Everywhere that you stand, it's holy ground. So, and then says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, God of Jacob. And then he says, I've seen the misery of my people. That's the Hebrews in Egypt. And now I am going to get you to go and bring them out of Egypt. That's essentially the call. He's being called to be the leader of Israelites and to lead them out, leaving Egypt. Hence the whole name of the book, Exodus. Okay. Well, I mean, we know the rest of the story, right? We already read his resume. Okay. However, let's stop at this point in the story and think about what's going through Moses' mind as he was being called. Okay. At this point, you think about Moses. Remember, he had his 2 stages. He had some identity crisis, and then now he's had stability. Also, he's 80 years old. Okay. All he has now is his family and the flocks that they have, right? And they are very stable in this place. He's not necessarily a very religious person, because sometimes we think of these biblical characters that they are hyper-religious, they all like pastors and missionaries. Well, Moses definitely was not. How do we know that? Because while he was in the wilderness, he's far away from his people. They don't even have regular meetings or whatever they do as Hebrews. Secondly, we know later on, because it says he's got 2 sons. He didn't even bother to circumcise his sons. Circumcision is the sign that you belong to God, right? This family belonged to God. He didn't do that. Okay? He didn't even bother with it. We don't know whether he had worshiped God. We don't know whether he told his wife and his father-in-law or his sons about God. We don't know that. Likely not a lot. Because, didn't even do the most important thing, circumcise your kid. Okay? So suddenly he's being called to do something great and crazy. Because of course, this is, what kind of mission is this? Well, we know that, where am I going backwards? We know that it's a mission of action. Like if he accepts this mission, he has to leave his comfort zone and go back to Egypt. He had to do something, get the people out, right? And we know it's a very challenging and dangerous mission. It's like, well, yeah, it's not just like being a travel agent. Look, you're going on tour outside of Egypt. I got a little flag here. Let's go. We're taking this bus and leaving. No, right? It's like you have to fight the Pharaoh to be able to get out, right? That's a little crazy. If I were Moses, I'm thinking, excuse me, whatever your name is. True, he didn't know that yet. Who are you? God gave him a name. That's great. You might be 40 years late, really, right? Because that story has been happening in my life when I was 40. I really wanted to help my people to leave Egypt and fight the Egyptians. Well, where were you then? How come you weren't calling me when I was 40? There is a big difference between 40 and 80. I mean, most of you wouldn't know, but some of us who are closer to 80 than 40, we might understand, right? Gosh, you want us to go and fight wars and all these things. 40 is much better than 80, okay? Right? And secondly, you understand, it doesn't matter what I want to do. These guys don't want me. They have already rejected me. What makes you think they're going to accept me? Right? That doesn't really make any sense. Right? That doesn't make any sense. Not only that, but think about it. I have a wife, I have children, probably have grandchildren at this point, and we had a good life. Like, why am I going to disturb that and go and do something crazy that I don't even know is possible? Why would he want to do that? Accepting this mission means upsetting the apple cart, right? And changing something in life when you're 80. That's a little crazy. However, let us think about the last 2 points. Not only is this a mission of action and dangerous mission, but this is a mission that defines life's purpose. decisions are like this. A lot of times in our life, we're faced with a decision. And you can only make the decision once. Right? And once you made a decision, you've chosen to go on a certain road. And you're giving up another choice. Right? So that's how decisions work. And here is Moses faced with his decision. He can decide to go right, hypothetically, and follow God, or go left, back home. We know what he did, right? Ultimately, he followed God, and he did what God wanted him to do. But he could have gone left and go home, right? And what would have happened if he had gone left and go home? Well, I know it's a hypothetical question. It didn't happen, right? So, but let's just say if it happens, well, then we wouldn't know very much, would we? Because, first of all, he would not have been the religious leader for the Israelites. He would not have, go to Pharaoh and have the 10 plagues and the Passover. He would not have crossed over the Red Sea. He would not have seen the manna. He wouldn't have the pillars of cloud and pillars of fire. He wouldn't have any of these things. He would certainly have not have written parts of the Bible, right? He wouldn't do any of that. So when we look at Moses and his completed resume, his saying yes at this point is very important for the rest of the resume. You know what his life would be without saying yes at this point? I don't know. Likely not many people would know if he didn't say yes, right? So it's a life-defining moment. This mission defines who he is now for all of us and who he is for himself in front of God. Not only that, but it's a mission that affirms his life's identity and gives his life meaning. Ergo, the first part, a mission that defines his life purpose, is talking about going forward into the future. How you live your life will, every step of the way, that's going to determine who you are going to be as life completed. But what about the past? Who makes sense of what's in the past? And Moses might ask, well, why now? Why not 40 years earlier? Okay. And then I'm imagining God would answer was, well, because 40 years ago, you were not yet ready. Right? 40 years ago, Moses already possessed most of the qualities for being a leader because he was educated, right? He is a literate person. He is educated with everything in Egypt. He's also probably taught a lot of military strategy because, as a pharaoh, you do have to go to war a lot. And he's definitely been taught self-defense, right? And he probably taught whatever the management theory of the day, right? You're going to be a pharaoh's son, you got to manage people, okay? So he taught all these things. So who would be better to lead 1 million people other than someone who has all the education you need to be a leader? Moses. However, he's not completely prepared for it because of his immaturity in how he handles things, right? When something's not right, go kill someone, it's probably not the best leader that you want around. Don't you agree? Right? Things will go wrong all the time. You can't just kill people to solve problems, okay? That's not going to work very well. Okay, he has anger issues. He has identity issues. He has all these other issues. But the second 40 years is very helpful. Very helpful. You say, well, how so? He just move away, have his own family, just become a shepherd. Well, yeah, precisely, because now he learns not only to be a leader, but to be a shepherd. It's kind of hard to be a shepherd, believe it or not, because sheep is not the smartest animal around. And it's not the most obedient animal around, right? If a sheep goes stray, how are you gonna solve that problem? We're gonna, excuse me, let's have a talk. Let's reason this, 1, 2, 3, you shouldn't be straying away. Well, who would do that? That's pretty dumb. It's not gonna work with a sheep, right? Or you're gonna order them, sheep, follow. I said follow, I'm the shepherd. You can try all you want. I don't think that's going to work, right? To be a shepherd, sometimes you have the guy, you have to lead. Sometimes you're behind them to push them along a little bit. Otherwise, they're straight, and then you got to go and find them and bring them back. The Bible is full of illustrations about sheep, and Jesus talked enough about being a shepherd, right? So we understand. It takes a lot of patience and love and forgiveness. Because being mad at a sheep doesn't really help you change the sheep's behavior. Okay? Right? So for 40 years, he's in the desert trying to get these sheep to come and do all the right things and everything. Believe it or not, that is a very important thing. I know, Olivia, because I'm a pastor. Being a pastor is pretty hard. Not just up here and talking about all these things you understand. No, actually, most people might not even remember this sermon by tomorrow morning. Never mind trying to listen and do the right thing. No, we don't really do that. And think about the Israelites. After they left Egypt, they were wandering 40 years in the desert. And what kind of people were they? Oh my God, they complain a lot. Why do you bring us out here? We're going to starve to death. Then you got manna. Why do you give us only one kind of food? We try to fry manna, braise manna, barbecue manna, and it tastes the same. It sucks. We need some variety. Give us some meats. Now we got everything to eat. We don't have water. Again, we have water. Oh, yada, yada. Everything goes. And every other second, I was just reading through Exodus and Numbers and all these, and like, my goodness, how could Moses handle these people? There were uprisings, rebellions, people trying to overthrow them, and there's conspiracies against them all that time. Even God was really angry, especially with the golden calf thing, right? And it was giving them the 10 Commandments, and they were, building a golden calf. God's like, I'm going to strike them dead. And Moses, I'm going to make your descendants great. Yeah, I'm Moses. I'm like, well, it's really bad that you're going to kill everyone, but they're rebellious, that they deserve it. If you want to make my descendants great, that sounds like a good deal for me, right? But Moses didn't say that. Moses really said, no, God, don't do that, right? What will happen to your name if you do that? Because other people who didn't know what's going on are going to say, God is a malicious God. You brought these people out of Egypt just to strike them down here. And then that will be a deficient to your glorious name. Not only that, please have more mercy. And he said, if you're really going to exercise your anger and wrath, which is your right, blot my name out of the book of life and save them. Right? Essentially, he is trying to exchange his own life for that of all of the Israelites. Reminds us of what Jesus did for us, right? It was like, wow, that's a different Moses than the one we know. Remember the guy who punched someone and that guy died immediately? And that tells you 40 years of the desert really helped Moses to shape him into a leader that God can now use. And as he go forth and lead the Israelites, as we read the rest of Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, we find that this is a more complete leader in the way that he could lead. And the reason that he could do that is not because of his past 80 years he was doing nothing. No, in those 80 years, God's training him, even if he doesn't know it. And God's going to use our past for his purposes into the future. One very important thing, though, is Moses needs to say yes at this point in front of the burning bush. If he had said no, then not only did he not have a future, but he still wouldn't understand why he was raised in the palace and why he had to go through 40 years in the desert as a shepherd. It would not make sense. His life would not make sense. The only way Moses' life made sense was because now, as he obeyed God and stepped into the future, onto this mission that God had presented to him, then all of a sudden, every part of his life makes sense. Like a jigsaw puzzle that falls into place. And so for us, we might go through periods of time when we have identity crisis. We might have times when we build our stability, our wonderful life, and that's all good. But if and when God calls you, what are you going to do? And I so believe that God has created all of us differently. And His will is for us to achieve something in His wonderful plan. Everyone has a different purpose. We're not all going to be Moses. It's only going to be one. But none of us are useless. God wants to use me and wants to use you. But when that moment comes, will we say yes? It's going to be full of challenges, difficulties. There are a lot of reasons for you to say no. But like Moses, I believe, and this scripture tells us, when we say yes to God's mission, it will complete our life in a very strange way, not just the future, but the past as well. Because only God knows us even before we were born, and God tracks our life, and He's able to make every part of our life a blessing for others. Not just the wonderful moments, but also the valleys of our life. God can use that as well. And just as God had used Moses, He can use us. God used Moses not because he was somehow special. God used him because there was a plan for him, and he said yes. And so life begins with our yes. And this year, when we talk about listening to God's voice, trying to find what God's mission for us, what is our burden? What does God want us to do? Let us try together to find God's will for us, but when God has spoken, let us be brave enough to take that step, much as Moses did, because that is when our life began. Let's pray.